as the horse gets better and better and better, I think perhaps the rider struggles less. And then it's a false sense of success, and then when something hits you, you don't have coping mechanisms because you weren't allowed the struggle.
Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Culbertson, and this is Equestrian Voices. We celebrate when riders and their horses win, or they nail a new movement, or they jump clear, because those moments are big and loud and exciting. But then the question of how it's done sometimes looms a little bit more in the background. Was that achievement the product of integrity and character and fairness? Was it rushed or forced? Was it done in softness, or was it done in hardness? And these are questions that are central to my guest today. JJ Tate is an International Grand Prix Dressage rider and competitor whose success started young. She made her FEI debut at just 16 and was the nation's top young rider in 1999. By just a year later, she had a Young Rider silver medal to her name and a USDF bronze, silver, and gold medal. And now JJ has ridden and competed all over the world, including representing the United States in competition. She's trained 29 horses and counting up through the FEI levels, and she was longlisted for the World Equestrian Games. But for her, it's not just about winning or training the horse up to Grand Prix. She's done plenty of that, but it's important how it's done. She says her primary goals are to represent her country at the highest levels of competition while protecting and preserving the principles of classical dressage and generally just feeling really good about how she's training her horses. JJ has felt the tension between training her horses, herself, and her students with integrity and doing things the slow and fair and kind way versus getting to where she wants to go in the sport and reaching her own goals. Those two things don't always, it seems, neatly puzzle piece together. Her longtime mentor is Charles de Cunfee, who is a figurehead of classical dressage and is a big influence on her commitment to doing things in the way that makes the most sense and harmony with how horses are. How they innately think, how they move, how they learn, instead of fighting against those things. And in this episode, I chat with JJ about toughness and softness, two things that sound very contrary, but I think this episode makes the case that they coexist. We talk about taking criticism as a rider, as well as doling it out as a trainer. How in the world do you do that in a society that really values sensitivity? We talk about how we got to a place where a rider's merit is based on a competition record, which I realize is a super real thing. I mean, I just listed off JJ's competition record to establish her authority to you, the listener, even though I do not think that is the most interesting thing about her or the best thing she has to offer. We talk about struggle and how that plays into the rider's experience, as well as comparing the systems of Europe to the systems of North America. This is a big conversation that begs the question, as JJ so wonderfully puts it, what sort of person do you need to become for your horse to volunteer himself for you? And now let's hear from JJ. I went back and listened to some episodes of your podcast, and I had no idea that you had had a double mastectomy toward very recently.
Yeah.
That episode made me cry. I mean, I don't understand how anybody can have that kind of attitude about something so scary.
Well, thank you. It was one of those things where it's we're going to talk about it in the podcast today about character building and living with integrity and, things like that. And I was like, all those moments I was always so frustrated in my riding career, kind of built quite a bit of character in me. And, actually was able to help me deal with something like a double mastectomy and breast cancer and this shock. I've never been to the hospital. I've never been sick. I mean, I just Dayquil and NyQuil my way through basically any, I just don't even think I've ever taken a sick day, and so to get that, the circumstances that then, were around it, it just brought out this positive beast in me that I've always known I've been positive, but that it took over me. It was just amazing. Yeah, it was a incredible, powerful experience for sure.
It was a forced pause.
It was. It was.
Although it sounds like a very short pause.
It also was.
You're like, yeah, I'm headed out to teach this afternoon. Wait, what?
Yeah, I was just not going to let it get me down. So that looked mentally and physically like I am walking up the hill to my arena to teach on Saturday after Wednesday's surgery. So figuratively and mentally it was like this is not getting me down.
Yeah, to maintain a little bit of normalcy. I mean that's strategic, really.
100%. And it's kind of a coping mechanism, right? Like I think all of us who love horses would say like we feel our best in ourselves when we're around them. It doesn't have to be like I'm in the saddle riding, it just was like I have to go up there and just be with my horses because they just make you feel better.
Yeah. Coming up in the sport, do you talk to me about sort of your background? Did you have a leg up in any department coming up in the sport, whether it was financial or that you were more talented than the people around you, or you were given a lot of amazing horses? Or did you identify more as like an underdog when you were coming up?
Well, I grew up in a very small town in Wisconsin, so I'm a country girl. Watching Isabel Worth and Nicole Uphoff on the VHS video, absolutely was inspiring and something I always felt like in myself, like I wanted to go do. I've always had Olympic dreams and riding on a world class level, but coming from a small town, it was definitely felt challenging for sure. I grew up with a great group of girls with a fantastic trainer. My parents definitely have supported my career. They helped me purchase a young rider horse, and later we had business partners and we all owned the stable. So it's definitely been huge help and a leg up from the support of my family for sure. But growing up riding very normal horses and coming from a really small town definitely felt a little bit like an underdog as far as like seeing on TV, and now people I'm sure see it on Facebook, these like fancy riders on these fancy horses and these fancy barns. And I definitely had a grassroots beginning. And I think it's definitely, made me aware of that struggle of making your way through an elite sport.
You mentioned you kind of came up on quote unquote normal horses. Do you think that that is different than what it is today? Because I feel like now today, even like a quote unquote normal horse, which let's talk about what that is too, now it's astronomically expensive.
It's very true. It's very true, right? And I think it is a little bit different. Like my first young rider's horse was like $16,000. Okay, that was 25 years ago. It was a long time ago, but it's hard because like does that girl on that horse still even have a place on the team, the young rider team? I know a lot of people at that age during those times, we all kind of took you know, a young horse that we developed, or, not a very expensive, schoolmaster type that you could, really learn the ropes. And I think today, I think it's difficult in the whole entire sport because the horse flesh has really increased, especially in the last like 15 years. I mean, they're just super mega athletes, and what's difficult is like every rider or trainer's merit is a little bit based on their competition record. And what's difficult about that is, of course, money doesn't make us happy, but money can buy a better horse, which when you're out horsing everyone in the class, you do win. And then it's a perception of success. And that becomes also the whole conversation of like, what is success? Having a mentor like Charles DeComfy for my whole life, really grounds you in the idea of like, what is actual merit? And are you as rich in character and integrity as you are in ribbons or horseflesh? And the love of the horse and the love of the art and the sport, I think always has to take precedence. And everyone has to find like their own path to what success means for them.
You mentioned Charles. I want to talk a little bit about sort of how he came into your life too, because I know he's had a great deal of influence on how you kind of stand in your integrity while also going after your goals. Having a mentor that is so knowledgeable and so wise and so foundational for the sport that's an enormous privilege. How does one find a mentor like that? How did you pair yourself up with Charles?
Well, I first met him, my trainer, Gail Keln. We were living in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, in a very small town in Wisconsin. And, she did a research, and it's funny now I think back, like, I have no idea how she even got a hold of him because, there's no internet and there's no, like, hardly any email, so I think she found his address, through the USDF because he was a judge. And she, like, wrote him a letter or made a phone call, or I don't know how she connected. He was out in California, originally from Hungary, came to the United States, was a professor in philosophy out in California, and an eye judge for in America for dressage, and a clinician. And so she somehow got a hold of him, and he came to our small town, our tiny little barn, and I met him first when I was 11, and it was a little bit, Gail created a bit of magic, behind this incredible person. And we got very lucky, growing up at Gail and Wayne's, because Colonel von Ziegner came, Colonel Lindquist came, she really helped us get a connection to the European tradition by having these incredible clinicians come. But I first met Charles when I was 11, and it was basically like meeting like dressage God, when he would always, make theory sessions mandatory. So, writing notes from his lecture, your pencil would be on fire because like everything he said was so pertinent and important. And I just felt from day one that like I wanted to memorize everything this man has to say because it speaks to my soul. And I know I'm so blessed to have met him at such a fundamental age, but also have a trainer that followed a lot of his principles, So Gail made it very important for us to develop character and called us out, when we were in the wrong. We would have to have a closed door session where we would, come into her office and the door would get closed, and we would have to have a discussion about how we acted, what we did. She really developed critical thinking, so as much as it was Charles too, Gail had a big influence, so I feel so blessed to have a trainer in the beginning that absolutely made becoming a good horsewoman, doing everything for the love of the horse, and competition always coming second to that, and then having Charles come in for clinics and absolutely say the same thing on even a greater, deeper level, and being able to read all of his incredible books was just an incredible blend to today's fast society, like immediate reward, all these things. Because of course, we all know with horses, it's a slow burn, it's a slow climb. At 18, I graduated high school, and I had written letters to, anyone who would read it. And Charles was the only one who responded. And he said, yeah, I would send you either to the Spanish riding school in Vienna, but they don't take women, or to Eula Dalos in Budapest, Hungary. And I thought, well, where the heck is Hungary? I wanted to go to Germany. And so that just kind of set me on my trajectory to search for the person or people and coaches and trainers who can help me blend the love for what is best for the horse and giving the horse enough time, yet developing a wonderful, successful competition partner as well.
Does the Vienna riding school still not take women?
I think it is now more open to women, but I'm not sure how many women actually participate in the performances.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe that's a subject
That's
of
a whole
another
nother
podcast.
topic.
One of the things that you mentioned was how your trainer had these kind of closed door sessions where it sounds like it was really a moment in your development with this person to develop as a human being, to get some of those like life skills, have a little accountability, really talk about, getting back to like the integrity, how we act, how we think, how we behave, what motivates us. And that's something that, I'm a Blue Devils fan, go Duke. Coach K is legendary
Yes.
for having these absolutely incredible relationships with his players and these locker room talks with his players that have nothing to do with basketball, but also everything to do with basketball, because it's more about who you are and how you handle adversity and how you come back from a loss, and just these much more holistic minded conversations that give you a wider perspective than just like, did I get the correct angle on my shoulder in today?
Or did I get the right score? Did I win my class? It was so much more based in character development and accountability. Yeah, exactly, like you're talking about, bringing kind of the virtues alive, right? Like, do you have courage? Do you have discipline? Can you have humility? Like all of these wonderful things, which, when we look at the classical principles of dressage, it's like so many young rulers, right? Like young royalty needed to learn dressage because it was of character development. Because before you could ever learn to rule a country, you had to be able to not just rule the horse, but rule yourself with the lessons this horse is giving you. Like they don't care you're the future king of France. Like you need to get control of yourself and be in good character standing so that you can train the horse or ask the horse to do these things. And then through the learning you will learn from dressage, you will be able to conduct yourself in a way that people will follow you. This deep character growth, has really been rooted in riding. Yeah, there was absolutely accountability talks and action reaction, like, well, you did this and then that happened. What do you think you could have done differently? Or really like calling you out on everything. Nowadays, like you wonder, like, are enough people getting these, character accountability talks, where it is, Charles always talks about, even though it was Gail, my first trainer, who would have the closed door talk, it was Charles who then brought those virtues alive in a greater sense of that is why Gail, my home trainer, is really helping me become a good horse person, and have good horsemanship and care about the horse first and the competition second or third, and then Charles would come and give us, these incredible lectures on theory and, the gradual development of the horse and the gradual development of the character of the rider, because we all need to seek to become a rider with a capital R, and not just make it a horsing sport. And I love those locker room talks you're talking about, that, yeah, like, who are you first and foremost, and Charles also always talks about like riding well is a metaphor for life, that you do have to have courage to get on that horse, and you do need to have discipline to show up every day, and you do need to have responsibility for oneself and humility that you're part of a greater good, and you're up there for two graces, the grace of God and the grace of that horse, and if either one of them want you off, your little ego is going to be in the dirt. And this allowing the horse to develop the character of the rider, I think, is something we have to help the current, not even generation, but just the sport of which today, the horse is so athletically inclined now. It's easy to get on it and shorten the reins, and it's like on the bit, and part of the growth comes from struggle. As the horse gets better and better and better, I think perhaps the rider struggles less, and then it's a false sense of success, and then when something hits you, like you need a double mastectomy, you don't have coping mechanisms because you weren't allowed the struggle, so I think, for a long time I resented, seeing all my colleagues and friends with better horses and big sponsors riding around on better horses and getting all the training that they want, and me having to, kind of ride the normal horse and bring the best out of that horse with correct riding and good horsemanship, and patience and, all the great things, But the day I got diagnosed with cancer, I was like, wow, thank you, because I was able to cope with something so, terrible in sort of like an out of body experience of like my solid character took over and I was able to tackle it with positivity and strength. And that became quite an incredible experience. And I thank all the horses that wouldn't go on the bit with me, and I didn't win the class, and I had to go home and figure out why I didn't win the class. Like, how could I get better? Like, oh, I gave that away. I need to work on the horse getting stronger, or bring out the cavalettis because his trot is very limited. It just it helps you also to become curious. And that's, I think, something also like, well, why is that? Why is that not where I want it to be? How can I, what other T can I cross or I can I dot to make this performance compete with those horses that maybe they're not crossing the T's and dotting the I's?
It almost feels like we've gotten to a place where this is a little bit flip-flopped. You were talking about how riding was essentially a character development tool and a little bit of an audit of the rider's
Yes.
character.
Yes.
And now, in our kind of competition first view of sport, whether you think that's positive or negative, it's the opposite. We've got the competition, the skills are what come first. And what's happening behind the curtain or kind of between the rider's ears, that feels more secondary. And the character of what's happening, back in the barns, that feels more secondary to what the score was in the ring. I mean, you see it, even with, and I'm not villainizing, because there are some riders out there like yourself who have it all. But, you see it with even the kinds of riders that are rewarded because they win and they're always on the leaderboard. I've had conversations with some of those riders, and for them, it really isn't always about the horse. They really like to compete. They really like to win. They're very competitive human beings. And the fact that it's on this animal, they like their horses, but it's not like they feel this grand calling to be in partnership with this animal. I think that we aren't being honest with ourselves as a sport if we say that every successful rider is doing it for the love of the horse.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think you have a really interesting perspective being in the position that you have, to be able to interview and kind of get behind closed doors to some of these top riders. Yeah, you're 100% right as far as I'm also love to win. But I think it's about so much goes into how are you winning? And that's what's difficult, and that's totally different, which makes riding so incredible and so different, is that it isn't just like, yeah, we all want to win no matter what. Like, do whatever it takes, turn over every stone. I used to play basketball, so that's great. Like, yes, the team is in the gym. The team is practicing off season. Everyone's lifting weights. Everybody's running. Everyone's getting better. There's sports psychology sessions. We're doing everything we can to win. But the horse hasn't signed up for this. He didn't say, hey, you know what I love to do is travel on an airplane to go across the world to go do this thing alone, and it's just kind of amazing that they let us do any of this. This herd animal, you put alone in a metal box, take them out, climb on their back and make them do the test. But there's really no other grand feeling than to have the horse volunteer up for that, and like, what kind of person are you, or do you need to become to have the horse volunteer themselves to you? And yeah, there are bullies in everywhere. There's bullies everywhere that like bully the horse into doing it because they want to win and you better do it. And if you don't work out, I got a new one because we've got, the financial support to just get a new one if you don't work out, and I think the true horsemen really do come to the top. But I think there's also a lot of true horsemen that kind of got turned off from competing because of that fact. It is so much about the how, like, how do you become that rider that horse wants to do it for you? Because there has been times, I'm not going to lie, that I'm like, well, if that's the way I need to do it to make it to where I want to go, then maybe I don't want to go there. And I've really vowed to myself, because my background with Charles and what I think the big picture is from horses is who they can help us become as people. And so for me, going to the Olympics, like I don't want to lose that part. And I don't want to lose, like I love the horses as like a species, and I want to help people learn how to become better to help horses as a whole. They have their own language and they're their own species, and our job is to learn to think more like them and even to be more like them. They're very inclusive. They always belong, and that's a beautiful way. And horses live with their emotions and heart, on their sleeve. And like if we could all, learn to be a little bit more like horses, that might make the world a little bit better place, But if we're using them as a vehicle to supply something for our ego, then that's where it can be a little bit depressing, at the top of the sport, where, winning comes first and the horse as a sentient being comes second.
The way that you're describing it, in my head, there's a bit of tension between training the horse and sort of in these more classical principles and just classical or not, really being able to stand in the integrity of how it feels right for you, and then your competitive goals. Those two things, I'm sure they're in harmony in some moments, but I think that there's probably a disharmony in other moments. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Like when you think about, what classical, or the traditional riding, it did start in military. So it was very regimented and very disciplined and incredibly consistent. And one of the big things, it lacked a lot of shortcuts, therefore it takes time, and it's a systematic, gradual development that's actually scientifically based, which is kind of cool about today. We have scientists, equine functional anatomists, we have veterinarians coming out with proof of like why things were the way they were, and I do think there, thank God, is a shift to, because it's now scientifically proven that the horse's body develops in a certain way. This is the best technique to ride it. For me, classical, is also about, it's not that it's this soft, fluffy, never any confrontation kind of way. Because, it is about this understanding of how the horse functions and this time that it takes to build the horse, so the shortcut riding is really where the limit comes in, right? And the horse today, you couldn't really do a lot of shortcuts back in the day, because the horse, it just took that long time to make it supple, and it just took the time it took because it was of limited athletic ability, like now.
Because the breeding has changed, essentially, is what you're saying, right? We have these animals who are much more genetically and anatomically predisposed to go in the way that we're trying to train them to go.
Exactly. They can just sort of do it, and so, I think what gets dangerous is to think about like the bones and the ligaments haven't changed. The horse's capacity for movement and their sensitivity has absolutely changed, but their spine, or it hasn't changed in the way it develops and grows, and so I think we have to just keep that alive in today's sport. And again, like going back to that idea of like, the military style, of classical tradition, also through the Baroque art, there's this interesting blend of always like what's beautiful should be form following function, so we all can see it, when Sabine Shoot-Carey was a perfect example. Her riding on Senseo was absolutely magical and beautiful, and everyone could witness it. You don't have to be an expert in dressage to say that performance was beautiful, and that is classical at its finest. She and the judges rewarded it. They also saw that when it was done well and done correctly, you really can't deny it that it looks beautiful to behold. People will always want to go to the ballet, and they will always want to go listen to a beautiful orchestra, because when it's in tune with, the energy of the universe, like you feel it and you see it. And really, if that's what you're striving for, then that performance is important and the placing becomes less, and I just think that was a beautiful modern example of that. Took a lot of time for her to develop that horse. She did it in a disciplined, systematic way, and it's very classical. We're not out there, bullying the horse and beating it up and making it do it because it's scared, of what we're going to do to it if it doesn't do it, and nothing built out of tension can be elegant, and so I think it's a little bit about, what's important to you. There's always going to be people who have access to good horses and can, pressure it up to that state. But I do think the human eye can discern the difference. For me, it's so important to have that beauty and harmony, within the top level of the sport.
When we're thinking about training horses in a way that feels good to us, that doesn't give us the ick.
Yes.
whether you're doing it or you're witnessing it. How do we have softness and discipline at the same time?
Well, I think, I always talk about in my teachings, it's like clarity is kindness. So when you think about what is soft is the ability to have the horse understand what you want, and it's about being as clear to the horse as you need to be, which creates the softness. It's not like you will never run up into any roughness. And I don't mean that in beat the horse up, but thinking about rough edges, smoothing around the rough edges, or, there does take a little bit of pressure to create a diamond, through hard things, you become stronger and a better person. Right. So, and I've talked to my sports psychologist about this, how do you not get attached to the outcome, but want to go to the Olympics beyond all things, and so there's always this dynamic shift of what's the most important thing right now. Sometimes, in order to be able to whisper, you have to get loud sometimes with the horse, but it isn't like there's just never any, clear riding, even Charles, who's the epitome. We always joke that we're well, Charles always tells us the horse is always right. Oh, someone's pulling, the horse knows who it is and I know who it is. Do you know who it is? But it's always also he's also the same person who is give him a 10-pounder with your foot, kick him one, no, so I can hear it, and you're just, it's this funny thing. And that through this amazing lesson, Charles kind of creates this giant, incredible extended trot you've never felt. The horse is fully using its body and body trotting. And you didn't get there through non-confrontation and fluff. You did work, and your muscles that you didn't even know you had in your abs are burning. So again, it goes back to that idea of the how are you getting there? And I think we have to be clear with our horses because they're clear with each other. So kind of being able to find that clarity in ourselves and consistency in ourselves, which again goes back to the character traits, really allows the horse to learn what are the expectations, from the rider.
Someone sent me this Facebook post, and I am a little embarrassed to bring up a Facebook post on this podcast, but we're going to do it. Someone sent me this Facebook post because I guess it was circulating, and they were like, you should talk about this, or what are your thoughts on this? And the first line is, you should spank your baby horse. And anyway, the post goes on. It says, I have it pulled up. I don't mean beat them. I don't mean give them a little tug on lead rope. I mean, a rude horse deserves and understands some rudeness right back at them, far better than a sweet whisper in their ear. Anyway, the post goes on, and it kind of elicited two responses. One was lots of people reposting it and saying truth, or the hands up emoji or whatever. And then other people who are we do not need more people being told to hit their horses. It's like the last thing we need. And it made me think about this question of whether towards ourselves, towards our horses, towards others around us in the horse industry, whether we need more softness or more toughness. And that's a really impossible thing to answer, but it's kind of always, I feel like I'm always tipping the scales in my own mind about this. I think about it with my kids too. I think about it with my dog, who's more ornery and awful and horribly behaved at 13 years old than she ever has been. But I kind of let her get away with it because she's like ancient. But what produces better results and what produces happier, healthier horses? And I think that the thing that comes back to what you were saying, JJ, is that there are moments that will be louder than others, but the fairness comes from it being extraordinarily black and white.
And consistent.
And consistent. And also, I think having a reasonable expectation of, is the thing that you're asking your horse to do within earshot of their actual toolbox as it stands now?
Well, and I think that goes back to too, like, we always say too, and one of my trainers have always said, like, does your horse understand what is being asked? And B, is he capable of doing it? And then if both of those answers are yes, then, you create the clarity to the horse that this is the boundary or this is the expectation. I think what's tricky is that, we're in an era of quick, immediate response. If you text someone, like, they're supposed to text you back right away. Like, if you want something on Amazon, you just click on it and you order it. It's on your doorstep tomorrow, So there's this instant gratification going on that is, of course, not with horses whatsoever. But, and it goes back to that idea of, like, the military has for people too, it has a program that whoever comes into the military, this process of said military or of correct traditional riding will produce a good person of society in almost all cases. Not for all people all the time, not for all horses all the time, but it's a way of developing characters of horses or people into responsible, well-behaved, citizens of the sport, And so I think there's this idea of, as long as the horse needs boundaries. He needs to know what's expected of him. We have to be calm, unemotional, and consistent in our showing the horse of those, boundaries. So yeah, if we're walking out to the pasture, you're not allowed to walk ahead of me, run away from me. This is how you need to be doing this. I think what's difficult about riding, witness it in the riding, is that, I call it, there's, for me, a lot of like reactive riding. I think there kind of is this place of people are dealing with symptoms and people don't understand enough the theory of riding enough to know, well, where is that coming from, right? Like, that's again going back to that character development of, like, okay, the horse is running out the left shoulder. Well, why is it doing that? Well, you just need to counter bend it and flex it and get that shoulder under control. But it's like, well, but why is it running out that shoulder? Well, it comes down to, well, the right hind leg doesn't want to take weight. Why does the right hind leg not want to take weight? Because 95% of all horses don't want to take weight on the right hind leg. And that's why he's doing that. So we actually don't just need to pull him to the left and kick him on the left side. We have to deal with that he's got a weak right hind leg and build that up. So there's this sense of, yeah, just, he's got to know the law and he's got to do it, but it has to go deeper than that, of like, if you consistently focus on making the right hind leg stronger, he won't fall out the left shoulder, so then you still need to, like, react to the thing that's happening, but it's on a much deeper, basis, where there does take discipline. He might kick at your right leg. you are going to have to like get louder to tell him that is the wrong response, but it's going deeper into the reasons why, the base origin of these symptoms, and not just riding and beating the horse up because of the symptom is happening. So I think it's like, yes, we have to get tougher in one way with ourselves to have a clear line, which is strength of character in our own selves, to be able to show up every day with that horse unemotional and not frustrated and not make any correction out of frustration. But with some horses, you have to be loud and clear so the horse can receive the message. And then it's also important, of course, that then the stimuli goes away right away, so that the horse understands, like, oh, okay, like I knew that was right.
If you've ever had a horse that has been barn sour or buddy sour, you know how frustrating that type of behavior can be. You just want to ride, you just want your horse to pay attention to you, or for you to be able to lead your horse away from his buddies or from the barn and just have a nice little quiet walk. And all they can do is think about getting back to the barn, or they're screaming for their friends. It is frustrating. It's also part of the horse's nature. It is literally in their DNA to want to be with their friends or want to be near their safe space. The good thing is that you can drastically improve this behavior in a way that does not involve force or coercion, doesn't involve punishing your horse for that type of behavior. That's only going to make them more anxious. This is a confidence-building way to work with the way that your horse thinks and learns and play with what naturally motivates him. In this newest masterclass, Chelsea Kennedy teaches training the barn sour horse. In this course, Chelsea will teach you some tools and techniques to use and manage your horse's natural tendencies and leave you with a more responsive and engaged horse by choice. That's the most important part. This is going to work with what naturally motivates your horse, and they're going to want to be more attentive to you. They're not going to be afraid of you punishing them for the behavior that you don't like. By the end of this course, you will be amazed at not only the things that you're able to do with your horse, but the improvement in the connection and relationship between yourself and your horse. If you want to check out this course, just go to equestrianmasterclass.com/voices to get $50 off of an annual membership to access this course and all of the other amazing Equestrian Masterclass courses. One more time, that's equestrianmasterclass.com/voices for $50 off. One of my earliest horse show memories was standing in a tack stall, dirt floor, no stall mats or anything down, dirt floor tack stall, trying to pull on these horribly uncomfortable, zero give whatsoever, felt like they'd been starched within an inch of their life breeches. The good old days. Thankfully, we are well past that time. And with brands like Nakovian pushing sport apparel technology forward, we're never going back. I really hope we're never going back. Nakovian is a newer brand that I've been really impressed with the cut of their clothes as well as the materials, and I really like what the brand stands for. They are built on the belief that riders deserve to ride in excellent gear that moves with them and enhances their experience in the saddle, rather than, like my breeches that I grew up riding in, chafe them like sandpaper. They're big on size inclusivity, as well as designing clothes that flatter everybody and also last a really long time. So you won't be buying new breeches every couple of months, because that can get really costly and add up really, really quickly. Before they release any of their products, they test these clothes really vigorously to make sure they last, and I love that. I'm going to tell you what I've tried and just a little bit about my thoughts on each piece. So I've tried the white base layer, and this thing rocks. It was really, really flattering, even when I first tried it on and I was only 4 months postpartum. And I found it really flattering because it has a curved edge at the bottom that gives you like a little bit of an hourglass shape. It's a spongy material that adds a lot of warmth. It is winter in the Northeast, so I've definitely put this one to the test. I've also tried their black standard breech. This is probably my favorite item. These have a thick waistband that doesn't roll over when you bend over to like pick up, a hoof pick off the ground or whatever. It hits right where a high-waisted breech should hit, in my opinion, like right above the hip bones without being obnoxiously high. Like it's not all the way up to your sports bra band or anything like that. They're grippy and they hold my phone, and they feel kind of like a second skin, but in the way that they sort of hold you in slightly. And that's my preference. That's what I like. My advice is to size up if you are in between sizes. Okay, the lounge set. I liked this set, but I feel like it ran quite small. So size up at least one size, in my opinion. I wish the pants had a little more give, but overall, this set is cozy. The leggings. Okay, I wear these all the time. I'm wearing them right now, actually, as I'm about to go out on a walk with my kids. Okay, so if you want to check out and support this brand and their mission, you can go to Nakovian.com and you can get 15% off your order with Noel Floyd 15 at checkout. So that's Nakovian.com, Noel Floyd 15 at checkout for 15% off. Horse ownership. Oh man, it comes with a lot of joy and also a lot of uncertainty. And most of that uncertainty is related to your horse's health and your finances. Those things just go hand in hand. And for a lot of people, including myself, equine insurance is a necessary part of our overall horse care plan. I was recently speaking with Laura Conaway, who is an amateur Grand Prix show jumper and president of Conaway and Associates Equine Insurance Services. And she shared 3 things that I think everyone should know before they go to insure their horse. First, she told me that all equine insurance policies are what are called term policies. That means they're subject to change after the designated term is over. This is based on the horse's state of health at the time of the policy renewal. So, for example, if a lameness issue exists and is unresolved, insurance company underwriters may place exclusions or exceptions that will not be covered by the policy on that issue for the upcoming policy period, meaning your insurance will not reimburse you for treatment related to that specific issue. However, all insurance carriers offer some sort of policy protection built in to assist policyholders in the event of an injury or illness. The specifics of that are going to vary between carriers. Second, you can choose whether you will insure your horse to the market value of the horse or the purchase price. So interestingly, if you have bought a horse and then you've put in a lot of training and showing after your purchase, you can request a value increase review. Why would you want to do this? Because this will change the mortality reimbursement that you would receive if something unexpected happens to your horse. Finally, medical reimbursement is one of the most common forms of equine insurance, but reimbursement offerings vary a lot between insurance carriers, so it's important to understand the difference in programs offered. Look, insurance can be confusing, and since equine insurance policies vary so much between insurance carriers and are specific to just your horse, it's important to have a trusted agency as a partner to help you navigate your options. Conaway and Associates Equine Insurance Services is a group of horse people who protect horse people by offering horse, farm, and liability insurance coverage options. The Conaway and Associates team has been helping equestrians navigate coverage for more than 30 years so that they can focus on what actually matters to them, which is their horse. To learn more, go to conaway.net. That's CONNAWAY.net, or call 501-868-8084. The next question that I have is a bit of a broad one. It's something that we hear a lot, and I think it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. And that is, in your opinion and in your assessment, do you think that the horse is always a direct product of the human training it?
Yes. And I see it in both ways. I do see it in like Adrienne Lyle is our top. She's amazing, and she 100% produces a confident horse that's ready to go out there for her to knock it out of the park. And that's beautiful to behold. There's also, I have some clients, who are more timid, kind of scared, and that horse becomes also insecure because of that person, and so I think, again, it's like they're always our mirrors into ourselves, and they're showing us, just like life shows us experiences, kind of the same thing kind of keeps happening if you don't learn the lesson. I think horses create that same opportunity for us to learn to look within, to be like, where can I become stronger in myself to help get through this situation I'm having with this horse, right? Like, I have a young horse, and we were laughing because he's like my brain, which is like bad, but it's like he's too busy, right? Like, I started meditating after I got breast cancer, and so that's been like, whew, like quiet the mind and go within, and I'm like, whoo, I'm really busy there, and so he's also like distracted, and I'm like, oh my God, like it's so annoying for me when he just can't focus. But then I'm like, but I need to focus, because then all of a sudden I'm looking at everything around the ring that he's going to react to too. And I take my eye off the prize. I have another horse that helps me with not feeling good enough. I have another horse that makes me, aware of whatever shortcoming I'm working on getting better, and I see it in all my students. And I think it's kind of fun to kind of look at the horses in your life and even the relationship in your life and say like, okay, how can I become better here?
So much of, I think, what we're talking about is that growth mindset, that you were very, very lucky if you had an instructor or a trainer or, a teacher or somebody, maybe not even necessarily in the riding world, who gave you this tool in your younger years. And it sounds like you did, JJ, for you, that a growth mindset was inherently part of your development as a rider, whether or not it was called a growth mindset or not. Do you feel that that is something that you've mastered? And do you feel like you've mastered taking criticism and, again, being kind of that tough on yourself and accountable with yourself? Or do you think that that's something that is changing in you, especially in light of like all of the recent things that have been going on in your life?
I think that's the thing about the growth mindset, right? That it's like you're never done growing and you can always get better. And I do feel, my family, my mom, we would always discuss things deeper, like, well, why do you think that happened? What could you have said differently to make a different outcome? And that's the whole critical thinking, with, nowadays, like, you're not allowed to like tell someone like who even works for you, like, hey, how you're handling that is not okay. It's like, well, you're going to hurt my feelings, or I don't even, it just becomes a very, very sensitive about like having that uncomfortable conversation of like, no, you could do better there. This is why, and I think growth comes just kind of constantly. And I think like just the different levels of growth, now I feel like I am growing in a way to bring all the knowledge I've created by riding every horse under the sun. I was adding up the hours of like 96,000 hours of riding. I was like, I have a lot of experience. I would
Holy
really
cow.
like to get on a team soon, and but now it's a little bit like the growth is like, okay, trust what you know and now put it to use. There has been a lot of like information gathering and learning the craft and creating a successful business, creating a successful online academy, competing a lot of different horses at the FEI, and like, now I need to like, okay, it's go time, like I've got some good horses, and, now it's a little bit about making it, instead of knowledge, like turning that all into understanding and like being that. So I think the growth never changes. And I think when you have a growth mindset, I think it's really important, because getting stuck like in anywhere in your life, I feel like, is just not a good place to be. Whether your horse feels stuck or you feel stuck, physically you feel stuck, emotionally you feel stuck, like we're always looking for, even if it's one tiny step, I think it's important to just keep moving forward in some type of capacity. And so I think that idea of like being able to take criticism, I mean, I think, as a dressage rider, I think we absolutely sign ourselves up for that. We actually pay for someone to be judging us in front of all of our friends and colleagues and clients and supporters. And then we also paid the judge to let us know, like, okay, that's not great how you're doing that, But also, I think it's important too to really truly understand your craft and become educated. Everyone can pick up books. Everyone can, learn. There's so much accessibility now of good writing and good teaching on the internet. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of information we have at our hands. And I think everyone who owns a horse is responsible to become knowledgeable, because you become that spokesperson for that horse too. And so the growth might not only be in like riding skills, it might be being able to use your voice to speak up for your horse, and where in your life could you maybe speak up for yourself better? Or, I think it's this growth mindset is something that is learned in the struggle. And I think we need to allow the struggle to happen for the growth.
Thinking about the vast number of interpersonal relationships that are made within the sport, because we're always thinking about our relationship to the horse and all of that sort of thing. But the number of human to human relationships that this community facilitates or necessitates, however you view that, is enormous. We have an enormous web of people that it would behoove us to interact with in a constructive and positive way on a daily basis. But this is something that, as a trainer who has students and you have apprentices and you have people who are keen to learn from you, but we are also existing in a moment where there is a lot of sensitivity. And in some ways that's nice and great and lovely. And I don't think either one of us would necessarily root for the trainer who is like doing a character assassination on their rider in a public schooling ring, ripping them to shreds, screaming at them, super dysregulated, like super angry. And how are we shooting ourselves in the foot when, as a trainer, or as a coach, we can't then say to our student, that was not okay. What you just did was not okay, without the backlash of that person not taking that criticism well. How do you begin to think about that and toe the line? Is it like, how do you put that into practice? Do you just feel it out on sort of a one-on-one basis? Do you have an upfront conversation with people kind of saying like, look, if you're here and you want to learn from me, there will probably be moments that challenge you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I do think it's interesting too, like you kind of a little bit lead by example, right? Like we talked about, that dysregulation of people, and like, how does the working student know they're in a good situation? And, every working student position or apprentice position is going to be full of hard work and tough times and giving up your social life to do it, but I don't know anyone who's been successful in anything who hasn't worked really hard for it. There's a little bit also of this being around like-minded people, that like I lead by example too, where you don't see me losing my temper on a horse and it comes back to the barn, whatever, frothy or bloody or nervous or hyped up, or so they watch, there's this whole invisible influence going on, that people watch you carry and conduct yourself with integrity, not only with other people, but with the horses that they can witness you train, right? I do think sometimes it becomes, the truth is always in the middle, right? It's like, yes, you need to be clear with a horse, and sometimes you need to be louder to make the correction if you need to, but it can never be done by punishing, and that's the same way with like, yeah, your trainer can get tough on you and they can tell you the truth and they can raise their voice to you and they can inspire you to create change in the horse, but it never needs to be like belittling and shouting at you on like a character assault, that you're an idiot or you're so dumb or you're fat or like whatever, like would be very unhealthy to be happening, and I thank God was never really exposed to a high level of unhealth in that department. But you can get your point across without that, even with the horse, like you can be firm, but you don't need to be abusive. You can be clear, but you don't need to be impatient. You can be soft, but that doesn't mean you're a doormat. You can be patient, again, but like not let the horse get away with everything, and that's where I think the miscommunication of like, you can be kind, but that doesn't mean you're a pushover. And you can give the horse time, but that doesn't mean you're never going to get there, and you're not going to hold the horse to like toe the line. And I think you can know a lot by someone who, how they teach, how they ride. It's a little bit interchangeable because it is, you're on display. Your true self is a little bit like on display with like who you are when you're on the horse or who you are when you're teaching. We have to pay attention to things like that. And, if it seems wrong, it probably is wrong, or if that seemed like, oof, that seemed like really harsh. Like, was that totally necessary? And those are the questions, instead of blindly following someone that you're like, oh my God, he went to 4 Olympics, he must know. Sometimes, you can be successful in the competition arena and actually be a terrible person. And you've got to be able to like not let some of that smoke and mirrors or the shiny facade. You have to be aware of those things in other people, as well as, you need to be able to know it in yourself. Know thyself so that you can also see others clearly, and I think that's an important thing that we need to keep developing into people. And that's, honestly why Charles is still such an important part of my life, because I mean, he just like whoop, like brings it back to so much of that isn't necessary. You don't have to scare the horse into doing it, because when it really comes down to it, and you've like bullied the horse and you've beat it up and you've, made it do it, or else, in that moment when it really counts and you don't have a whip in front of 5 judges at the big show, the horse is going to be like, I'm not going to do it because you forced me into it. And now I can decide not to do it. I think there's little keys, that you've got to like be aware of and see, how, but like this invisible piece of like, how do they treat their staff? How do they treat their other clients? It's always about like, who are you when no one's watching? Like, how do they treat their clients that aren't sponsoring their Olympic dream? Like, do they treat them with respect too? Because then they'll probably treat you with respect. But we have to be a little bit eyes wide open to be able to make a character assessment separate from competition results.
You've spent a lot of time, as I understand it, in Europe. Now you're based in the US. Let's talk about some comparisons there in terms of that toughness and softness and discipline. And let's talk about the horses first. If you had to sort of compare not only just training systems, but just general energy about it, general mindset. Do you think that there's a bit more firmness in Europe or firmness here? What are your feelings around that?
I spent the last 8 months in Europe, and I'm going back again. And I lived in Europe prior to that, probably 20 years ago. And it's definitely an industry, and I think there's good and bad things about that, right? Like, I think young horses, because they're now can be worth so much money in everywhere across the globe, I think it's tempting to, exploit the horse's talents to get as much money from them, for sure. But I do think the horse world as a culture in Europe is pretty special. Everyone kind of loves the horses. It's exciting. The horse quality is incredible. So many people are like going out to the stallion shows and they're talking about what bloodlines are doing what. And so many people are educated about it. There are more people on a Sunday afternoon drinking a beer, watching stallions go around than there are at the dressage show in Wellington. So I think that's a huge fun piece of like how Europeans feel about their horses. They're very proud of them. They're excited about them. They want to see them do well. It's also could be on the other flip side that it's like it's a little bit impatient with the horse's development, and they don't maybe want to take the time because that's going to be too much money. The horse needs to either make it or break it, or do it or don't, and so they can also kind of go through horses a little bit quicker because there's so many amazing animals, over there. But it is also, I kind of feel like it's the difference of like be wanting to be a dancer and then going to New York City to become a dancer, like it's a little bit like it's tough to make it in Europe. There's so many good riders. And if you are not brave enough, strong enough, talented enough, strong in your character enough to take it, there's like five people waiting to take your job. It's just a different way of living, right? Like we were in Moonster. I was at Michael Klemke's barn, which was awesome. But everyone's riding bicycles. It's like the bicycle capital of the world. And it doesn't matter if it's raining, sleeting, snowing, cold, hot, whatever. Like they're riding their bicycle because that's what they're doing, So there is a little bit this difference in toughness, I think, because there's no fluff and there's no babying anybody. Like if you want to ride horses, you don't sign a release form where you go to try horses, because it's this like normal thing of like it's an inherent risk. You might get hurt. Get on with your own courage or don't, and they don't care either way, and so it's a little bit like we've created, I think, in America sometimes a little bit too much fluff and too much softness, but that also creates, inclusivity, like that everyone can be included. If you're a little bit scared to canter, well, we can still help you enjoy the sport in your own way, and in Europe, it would be like, well, then don't ride horses, and it's just, it's got its benefits and it's got its hardships, on both ways.
That's really interesting. And I don't know if I've thought about it in quite that way.
Totally. And it's always like the blend, right? Like why I went to Europe was because there is this like ride the horse. Just get on and ride the horse. Don't think about it too much. Don't analyze it too much. Ride the horse. And so that for me personally was really great to like get back into like get in there and ride, But I think European horses come from it's not, I mean, and the Europeans love their horses. I'm not saying they don't, but it's not this like, Americans have a little bit of a way to like let the horse walk all over them, eat treats, sometimes bite them. And that's like a vision of, oh, he loves me. And it's like, no, he's like walking all over you and he's not respectful. And like, is that the right way? Because he wants to have cookies and paw on the cross ties because he loves you so much, but he kind of like loves your cookies. And European horses, like, of course they get cookies and stuff like that too, but they're not like babied and they're not overly treated by the vet. The horse learns like through the consistency that like it has to find the way through it, and it has to kind of like work hard, like I think, we always joke that like, oh, a lot of the horses would love like an amateur rider to learn on them, because they won't have to, they'll get spoiled and that'll be great. And they'll get all these hours of turnout if they like that, but also, the horse can start misbehaving soon. And it's like, well, why is that? And it's like, because we're vague a lot of times because we love them. We don't give them as clear boundaries because in America, I think we love them in a different way than the Europeans do. And so we kind of like to make them into dogs and they're not dogs. And so, without this clarity and consistency and boundaries, the horse can then sometimes start to misbehave under saddle. And you'll call the European person you bought it from, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what you're talking about. The horse never, ever offered to do that. But again, there's like this invisible authority of set standard. This is how we perform at the show. This is how we perform when we ride. You don't do that. It's just very clear and unemotional and just the way it is. And in America, it's like, oh, little brownie. No, you don't like the chair there. Okay, well, we won't go over there, or it's just a little bit different, and it's kind of fun to observe. And it's not that like Americans love their horses more than Germans. It's not anything about that. It's just interesting how the culture Like the Europeans love power and they love exuberance and they love the horse feeling alive. And sometimes that can be scary when the horse feels that way, you know? So we want to like, oh, I don't want to canter today because whatever. Like the Europeans are like, get on and go, you know, and like kick it also while you're at it, you know?
What you were just saying really made me think of the systems that are in place and how I have been in barns in the US in various disciplines that don't really seem to have a system in place, or it's like kind of the facade of a system, but it only applies to the horses and not really the riders. And so that allows a lot more wiggle room for, well, I don't know, I'm feeling a little bit tired today, so I'm just gonna not hold my horse to the standard that I did yesterday. And what you're saying is that softness and fairness, which if we're linking those hand in hand, come from the consistency. And so when you lack that systematic approach that you're saying that seems to be a strength in the barns that you've been in Europe, there's too much wiggle room. You lose the accountability. You lose this is just the way that we do it. Because I think sometimes when we talk about differences in training, as you were describing the European systems, it sounds like they just walk into the barn. It's very abrupt and we're like, get on and move your ass and blah, blah, blah. And I don't necessarily think it probably is always that way. It's just, there can be quiet people who run systems.
Yes.
You know, it's not necessarily the trainer always stomping into the barn being like,
yeah,
get on. Yeah. It just makes me wonder if we would like benefit from much more clear, stringent, thorough systems.
Yeah. And the word
here.
like discipline comes into my mind, right? And that goes back to like, that's classical, right? Because that was also in the military, was this discipline, and this discipline to show up every day to bring your best, that the same standard applies yesterday as it did today, even when you're tired. And that comes again back to character. Even when you're sore or you're tired or whatever is going on, you know. And it's funny about like part of being in that discipline system in Europe is that like you get on and you absolutely walk your horse 15 to 20 minutes on a long rein, like a hunt, like, or, you know, or as long a rein that is safe, you know, not everyone needs to go on the buckle, but that consistency of like, we get on, we always do it this way. Even if you're going to lunge, you're walking the horse, you know? And so it is like steeped in these traditions of what is good for the horse, you know, and where that the lack of discipline to, no matter how you're feeling, right? You have to show up and do a good job. And that's so important of like how you show up for your job, how you show up for your family. Like you have to sometimes dig deep when you didn't get a lot of sleep or you're not feeling great or you don't get along with this person at work. You know, it's like comes down to that ability to become focused and disciplined of like, I am a responsible person contributing to society in a good way, you know, and you can learn that from horses, but not if you're allowed to just get on and you're tired that day. So you're going to spank him past the chairs because he's annoying you that day because he spooks every dang day from them stupid chairs. And I'm just going to, today I'm just going to let him have it. You know, it's like, okay, that's absolutely like not, you know, that ability to kind of show up in a better way for the benefit of your horse or all the others like around you. And you see it in the pony riders, you know, that there is this really diligent, disciplined way of developing how a rider rides in Europe. Like very good seats, you know, very good positions. They're quite brave. They become confident. They can get, whether it's the perfect form, like they can like get control of the horse, you know? And so that's a little bit for me also what's very like real and organic about riding in Europe. You're riding in the rain. Doesn't matter if you're, you know, got your patent leather shiny boots on and your horse is $1,000,000. Like you're out there in the rain and you're in this terrible tent stalls, you know, at this great show, you know? And so it's interesting that it really also always comes back to those classical principles, So, like, is it really that different, or should it be that different? When we talk about the system and that, like, development gradually of the horse, and then developing of the riders and like the apprentices, there's so many barns where, we should walk 15 to 20 minutes before we get the horse going. Then we need to do a proper warm up. But a lot of times in European barns, or top level barns, the apprentice riders are doing that part, and then maybe the trainer helps from the ground, or maybe then the trainer gets on and goes through the Grand Prix. But they're also, it's kind of like a win-win. Like, the horses have more time to get warmed up and loose, and the young rider or the young trainer who's apprenticing learns to do that. Like, they get a chance to ride, to like warm the horse up. Of course, top people, I'm sure, dedicate their time to that horse. But a lot of times, like, the groom can, if you've got like 12 horses you need to ride that day, I think you create an interesting program. Some people use the treadmill or the walker. Sometimes the grooms gets on and takes it for a walk in the woods. So it does also become like, you can modernize the traditional way of developing horses, in that, you put them on the treadmill first and then they get warmed up that way, and I think everyone kind of has their own way of doing it. And it's important that inside yourself, you find what feels full of the most integrity, for you.
A comment that you made stood out to me, and I think you mentioned that Charles had said it, and that is that a lot of the roughness just isn't necessary if you truly understand the horse and how they think. In every horse sport, in every discipline, in every way that horses have been used, there have been people who have, to our modern definition, committed abuse to the horse. Do you think that it more often comes from a lack of education and understanding, kind of a la classical dressage? Or do you think that that is more of a lack of regulation or a mental problem within that person, and they haven't been held accountable, and it's gotten out of hand?
I mean, I think in difficult moments, it's always a giant challenge to be under control. When whatever kind of pressure that is, like, if it's the horse just not getting something, or you've got a big show coming up, or you're under pressure because you got to sell it for a lot of money, or like whatever the outside pressure is, everyone has been in a situation that, kind of tempers are boiling, and you just really frustrated with this thing, and you say something you're not supposed to say, or you do something that's not great. I think if people were really honest, I mean, horses, poke that bear in those instances, because they're just amazing, and so many of them just take it. And I know, be the first person to cast the first stone that you've never lost your temper and said something you wanted to take back, or did something that you regret. It's a difficult line to be striving to become one of the best, trainers or riders, or bring the best out of that horse, and you just can't find your way. And it's challenging for sure. When it's consistently happening, red flags should come up, and usually those people are also abusing people in some type of way. But I do think we have to constantly strive to, be in control of ourselves. It's in those moments of like, can you reel yourself back in and say, okay, I'm actually in a moment of gratitude that I am healthy. I am in a place where I can ride this horse. Wow, this is great. And then it's constantly that balance of like striving to do better, but not getting into these negative ways of pressure and force to be able to do it.
In closing, I would like to ask you, you are the messenger that can impart some Charles wisdom on us, because I feel like to close out this this podcast, which has so much to do with the classical way of training and everything like that, what is one of your favorite pieces of Charles de Kunfi wisdom that you would like to leave us with today?
I mean, I think what always connects me to the classical tradition is whenever Charles writes about or speaks about that, there's been like thousands of riders over hundreds of years that have come before me who have already sorted out, what the horse's responses are, what works best. And so this shortcutting or new technique doesn't need to be reinvented. And this connection to the history of the sport, I think, is always so powerful for me to know that like you're part of this brotherhood or like sisterhood of people have already gone through this. They've already figured out how to develop, a better trot or develop the piaffe, and these things that worked were kept. These things that were harsh to the horse or not great, those were set aside. For me, he's always connecting me to the other people who have studied the tradition and studied the art and really kind of connected to like the horse is still a horse, and we as humans are still working on becoming riders with a capital R, and that's so much about self-development. And, how great would it be to be able to go represent, your country at the top of the sport with all of your integrity intact, and to train for the love of the horse and to let the horse be the biggest judge of how you're doing. And knowing through this systematic approach that you can not only develop the horse into their own best athlete, but you develop yourself along the way.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, it would be a huge help to us if you would leave us a rating and review so that other riders can find this podcast. We will be releasing episodes of Equestrian Voices twice a month on the second and last Tuesday of every month. So be sure to subscribe so that you get a notification every time we launch a new episode. If you have a topic that you would like to hear, you can email us at info@noelfloyd.com. Or if you want more content, head on over to noelfloyd.com and follow Noel Floyd on social media. See you next time.